Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone. We've been having some great discussions today, and hopefully they're just going to continue with these sessions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we found out in the project about pregnancy and birth. And I want to start by acknowledging, as Agnieszka did earlier, the labour of access that disabled people perform during pregnancy and birth and during the whole journey through reproductive decision making, and how we need to account for that in how broader feminist work thinks about feminist and reproductive labour during that process as well. So I'm just going to raise a couple of issues that really struck me as important during the project when we looked at the provision of maternity care in Ireland. So one of the barriers that we found people faced as disabled pregnant people was about a lack of choice in their maternity care and lack of options. Disabled people are more likely to have their pregnancies designated as high risk. Even again, when some of the participants we talked to really kind of contested that and felt that it wasn't a high risk pregnancy, but they were put into that category, which meant that they couldn't have as much midwife led care as they might have liked and were more obstetric led in their care, even if that wasn't something that they felt was really going to work for them. Obviously, people's experiences of barriers in the public health maternity system versus the private options for care were really stark in the project. And there's been some discourse about that online lately, with people talking about the move to eradicate private options for maternity care and how that's going to impact on disabled people. But of course, as we discovered in the project, and we suspected already, disabled people face huge barriers in the public maternity system, just in terms of the way that all of the handover might be organized. So, information being shared from a GP over into the hospital setting, where things get missed and information mightn't be passed on or communicated. So the person feels like they have to explain the story all over again and go through their entire history and explain things that they would prefer just to be noted and for things to be available to them. So from things like inaccessible antenatal classes through to the actual care on the labour ward and the delivery suite and afterwards. Sometimes disabled people reported to us that it was feeling like, oh, we've never had a disabled person here before, we've never had someone with your disability here before, which cannot be true, and yet every time it felt like they were the first person, like an alien landing from another planet, arriving and looking for things that seemed so strange to the services that they were asking or making those requests to. And again, it's hard for us to, I suppose, untangle a lot of what's happening and see the ableism distinctly from other kinds of oppression and marginalization in maternity services. So we already know that the experience of women in general in accessing maternity care in Ireland is that many women feel that their consent isn't really being sought for interventions that happen in pregnancy and birth. So when you then present as a disabled person, how that kind of complicates whether your informed consent is even sought in the first place. But I was very struck by, I suppose, research that had been done, for example, by AIMS, where they talked about how 50% of their respondents didn't feel able to object to interventions that were proposed during pregnancy and birth. So one respondent in that research said, I felt I could not say no to anything. You have to put all of your trust in the medical professionals, but sometimes they are wrong. I refused plenty, but they weren't put as questions, another respondent said. Statements like, we're just going to, or, okay, so now we'll, had to be responded to quickly with, no, you won't. And that no wasn't always heard. And in recent research that Mairead, who chaired the last panel, and her colleague Deirdre Duffy published about responses to a survey they conducted, people who contested decisions that were taken on their behalf during pregnancy and birth were belittled and criticised as selfish, silly, ridiculous, insane, idiots, agitated and emotional and entertaining notions. So if you, of course, disabled people participated in all of these surveys and existing research, and in our work what we're trying to do is delve a bit deeper into those experiences and see to what extent people were more likely to encounter those kinds of attitudes if they presented and identified themselves as a disabled person. The issue of capacity has been discussed earlier today, and we are very conscious of the fact that the use of the ward of court system is happening to prevent people from making decisions about their own pregnancy care and their birth. And sometimes we have seen the imposition of wardship for a very short period of time, literally just to cover the pregnancy and the birth. But of course, once a person is made a ward of court, they lose all ability to make any decisions, any legally binding decisions for themselves. So the consequences of imposing this on individuals has to be really thought about and understood. And if it wasn't for the careful and rigorous reporting of journalists like Mary Carolyn, we wouldn't even know the extent of to which the wardship jurisdiction is being used in cases related to reproductive decision making. And not only wardship, but the use of the inherent jurisdiction of the High Court, another quite archaic legal mechanism that can be used to justify a really broad and wide-ranging suite of interventions, including interventions during pregnancy, interventions like sterilisation, including interventions like abortion, which we've talked about in some of the other panels as well. So the limited reporting of these cases limits the transparency and accountability that we have as researchers and as members of the public to understand how disabled people's reproductive decision-making is being denied. We do, as Susie and others have said, need to be really mindful of these problems as we head into the implementation of the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Act, where again, cases are going to be heard in the Circuit Court, which doesn't typically publish written judgments. So we need to be even more mindful of the need to have sensitive, thoughtful and ethical reporting of those decisions so that people can have a sense of how that jurisdiction is being used. Many disabled people in our research talked about the experience of the maternity restrictions during the COVID-19 pandemic and the particular impact this had on them as disabled pregnant people. So for example, even where partners were allowed, a pregnant person was allowed to have one nominated support person. And so if they needed access support, that was supposed to be an exception to this rule of one nominated support person. But as we know, that didn't really happen, or that wasn't really consistently applied in lots of different maternity units throughout the country. So for example, if somebody wanted their partner to attend and their partner, they may be a deaf person who needed interpretation, they should have had their partner plus an interpreter even during those times of heightened restrictions. And yet that often wasn't being respected for people, or they had to make a difficult choice between having communication access and having moral and emotional support during the birth, which is not something that anyone should have ever to choose between. Or if their partner is present, instead of providing that main role of emotional and moral support, they were then being asked to do the interpretation and support the communication. They couldn't focus and give the person the attention that they needed. We also explored issues like mental health support during pregnancy and birth, and again, the introduction of perinatal mental health support and hubs and hospitals around the country. Again, we think we need to carefully address this issue to ensure that we're being compliant with the human rights obligations we have under the UN Convention, not to impose psychiatric treatment without the informed consent of the individual, which of course our legal system and most legal systems around the world continue to allow for, and that's not in keeping with the individual's human rights. So when we hear calls for the introduction of a mother and baby perinatal mental health support unit, we have to consider, while yes, it is really important for the pregnant person to be able to receive support while they have their baby with them and not be separated, that support can take many forms and it should never be coerced on the person. And we are concerned that that could continue to happen in the existing system. So I've talked a lot about the barriers and the bad things that we identified in the research. So it's probably a good time for me to try to discuss some of the positives and things that people found that were actually helpful. And again, many of these have already occurred, I suppose, in what we've heard earlier today. But for most people, finding even just one professional who was open and who trusted that disabled person to know their own body mind, advocated for that person's choices to be respected with other peers and other professionals who were involved in the individual's care, that made all the difference. But we shouldn't have to depend on just finding one person who trusts you. This should be addressed at a systemic level so that we're not just looking for that one ally within the system. The whole system should be built to be more open and respectful of people's choices. Another key issue, which I'm sure we're also going to hear from Grace and the other panelists in terms of a facilitator, was having support from other disabled people. So peer support from people who had similar experiences or very different experiences of pregnancy and birth. just to have a wide range of knowledge and a safe space within which disabled people could complain. Because again, often people felt that they couldn't raise issues during pregnancy because they were very concerned about how they had to prove their ability to manage pregnancy and birth, and if they didn't, what that impact that might have on their parental rights, which we'll discuss on the next panel. So not just to complain, obviously to strategize and to find practical solutions and creative solutions together. So if there was greater resourcing of that kind of peer support and acknowledgement of that from within the systems that we have, things would be a lot better for people's individual experiences as well. So obviously, we're concerned about moving things forward to ensure greater human rights compliance of our existing systems, and that would include the abolition of wardship and the use of the inherent jurisdiction to order non-consensual interventions during pregnancy and birth on disabled people. We want to ensure that the will and preferences of disabled people are respected in any interventions and treatment and the whole of their journey of care during pregnancy and birth. Removing any exclusionary criteria that deny disabled people their access to more flexible and accessible options, including home births, which is a big issue we discussed in the project, where people might not have access to home birth because of the risk that their pregnancy is presumed to pose or perceived to pose, even if the home birth environment would be far more accessible for the individual to actually have the birth. Build in the accessibility in the whole system, working collaboratively, especially with organisations led and governed by disabled people directly. We need to make sure that access is available in all maternity settings across a wide spectrum of disability. And I was quite encouraged in the project when we did talk with practitioners in maternity units about how willing people were to do things like accessibility audits with disabled people from a wide range of experiences of disability. So I think that's at least one action that we could take forward based on the findings of our project. But I'm out of time now, so I'll stop and hand over to Grace to talk about her experiences.
Okay, hi everyone. So my name is Grace. Oh, hang on. Okay, is that okay? Okay, so yeah, as I said, my name is Grace and I'm mom to 3-year-old Patrick, who you can see a photograph of here. I'm a person with a disability. I was born without my lower right arm. I'm also a solo mom. Patrick was conceived with the help of donor sperm. So the decision to become a solo parent is a huge one, but even more so if you have a disability. Before having my son, I didn't have many role models of parents with disabilities, and I certainly knew no one with a disability who was doing solo parenting. I worried I would find certain things hard to manage on my own, and it took me nearly 4 years before I felt brave enough to try to have a baby by myself. I was lucky. In spite of being in my 40s, I became pregnant easily, and my pregnancy was straightforward and healthy. I enjoy exercise, and I kept this up throughout the pregnancy, moving to prenatal yoga and walks towards the end. I had a really good experience in the maternity hospital as a solo pregnant woman with a disability. I was even put in touch with another solo mom, and through her, I heard about a Single Mothers by Choice Facebook group. I was very relaxed and calm in pregnancy up until my 40-week scan, when a junior doctor suggested that because of my age that I should be induced. There were no signs that my son was in distress, and I explained that I'd read all the statistics about how often first-time pregnancies which are induced lead to cesareans, and how I really wanted to avoid a cesarean. However, I felt the doctor's manner was a bit dismissive, and I began to feel anxiety for the first time. After that, I tried all the natural things you can do to induce labour, including acupuncture and walking. And unfortunately, on one of my walks, I fell and landed badly on my arm, breaking my wrist. So at 41 weeks pregnant, I had one prosthetic arm and the other in a cast. Because I found it difficult to do things for myself without the use of any arms, I checked into the maternity hospital. So pre-labour wards are tough places to be if you're not actually in labour. So after 2 days, I agreed to be induced. I had prepared for labour by doing lots of prenatal yoga and birthing meditation, and for about 36 hours of labour, I just focused on this and was relatively calm and confident. But I got an infection in the hospital and I had a fever that became worse. Eventually I could see meconium, so I knew Patrick needed to be delivered quickly by cesarean. I got really upset about this. I felt that everything around Patrick's birth was going wrong, and I was really scared about the idea of surgery, especially with my still swollen and sore broken wrist. I was in a good bit of pain at the time. Staff in the hospital were lovely though, and I calmed down for the surgery and just focused on waiting to meet my baby. Patrick was born on the 23rd of January, and he was healthy and perfect. He was physically big and strong for a newborn, and I think he adapted to my limitations for the get-go. This is a photograph of me holding Patrick for the first time after he was delivered, and it was instantaneous awe and love when I held him. But managing a newborn was challenging and scary too. Before birth, I had done research on slings that would help me to hold my baby with one arm, but I hadn't anticipated not having an arm to use at all. I wasn't supposed to be lifting anything heavy with my broken wrist, and I wasn't supposed to be putting strain on my abdominal wound when getting out of bed, but it was impossible for me not to do those things. After delivery, I was given my own room and a buzzer to call if I needed help. Initially, I had difficulty picking up Patrick and helping him to latch on for breastfeeding or changing his nappy. Every time Patrick needed to be breastfed, someone had to help me to latch him on. Of course, newborn babies like to be breastfed a lot, so I worried that I was buzzing the nurses a lot. I was trying to be as independent as possible and not constantly buzzing for nurses to help me. So on my second night, I managed to pick Patrick up by myself using my elbows and get him into a sling. And then I tried to sit down in a chair with him asleep on my chest. This is the photograph of that night where I managed to get him into a sling and then took a picture because I was proud of myself for doing it. But the thing was, I sat down in a chair with him asleep on my chest, and he slipped into an awkward position, and I couldn't move him properly, and I couldn't get back out of the chair, and I couldn't reach the buzzer, which was on the bed, to get someone to come and help me. I had to just wait for someone to come into the room in the morning. During that time, I became upset, thinking of all the other babies in the ward who had two parents, both of them who had two arms, and here was my poor little baby with a parent who didn't even have one. But a nurse came and she helped us, and then when I was crying, she asked, did I need counselling? So I just explained that no, counselling wouldn't help, I needed practical solutions. So, a matron assigned a nurse to assist me for the next full day, and I did my best to try and learn as much as possible and get as independent as possible that day. It was a steep learning curve though, because every time anyone showed me things, they showed me with two hands, and I had to figure out how I would adapt that for my body. I was under time pressure from Patrick to learn too, so it was tough. Like here in the photographs, what you can see is pictures of Patrick being bathed by a nurse, but you can see she's using her two arms, so I have to figure out how I'm going to do that. You see a picture of somebody holding Patrick with a bottle, and again, they're using their two arms, so I have to figure out how I'm going to do that. Unfortunately, because I was struggling with getting Patrick to latch on for breastfeeding, and nurses were sometimes giving him a bottle at night, I developed mastitis. I couldn't massage my breast myself to relieve the block, so a nurse had to help me. I really began to worry that I was a huge bother, and one of the nurses who worked with me a good bit was asking me questions about how I thought I would manage when I left the hospital. She spoke of her concerns to the social worker who was working with me, and while I'd asked to speak to a social worker myself to see if I could arrange practical supports for when Patrick and I left hospital, some of the nurses' comments still worried me a bit. I actually felt relieved that during my social worker's visit, my brother came to visit me, and that he was there to say that I'm a very determined person who was good at overcoming challenges. The social worker was really kind and helpful, but I sensed that it was really important that people who didn't know me knew that I'm a pretty capable person and that I have a network of very good supports around me. In the end, after a week of being in the maternity hospital, I really wanted to leave. Everyone had been so lovely and kind, and I'm so grateful to them all. But in this public space, I didn't feel able to try all the ways of doing things with Patrick that would suit my body, but might look very awkward to a non-disabled person. I brought Patrick home to my parents' house for the first few months, and things were instantaneously better. A teacher from my school, I'm a teacher, is also a Quidju breastfeeding counsellor, and she came over the first evening I was home and found a way to help me breastfeed by myself. In the hospital, the lactation consultant had frowned on the use of nipple shields, but nipple shields made it so easy for Patrick to latch on by himself. I didn't need to be able to position my breast for him. My friend told me not to worry about using the nipple shields, as we would figure out how to wean Patrick off of those in time. She also recommended safe co-sleeping so that I could breastfeed in a side lying position, which was again easier for me and also let me get more sleep. On my first night home, my mom, that's a picture over there, she was all set to get up at 4 a.m. in the night to help me feed Patrick. But that first night home, I fed him all by myself all night and didn't need to wake her at all. I also managed to change his nappies and clothes myself using my teeth and my toes to help me pull when my arm was still too weak. All this was such a huge change to how I'd been in hospital. I was really getting my independence and back and building my confidence. So in addition to the nipple shields, which helped me feed Patrick, some of the other equipment that was essential to me in those early days was breastfeeding pillows. The pillows were great as they helped me to hold Patrick without using my arms much. And as his weight increased and my baby bump decreased, different ones with different shapes and textures became more suitable. And there's a picture of me, and you can kind of see with using a pillow and Patrick. And from the picture, you can see that I don't really need to use my arms to feed him. In fact, the public health nurse who came to visit me at the time afterwards exclaimed, "You don't need hands for breastfeeding." Another important piece of equipment were slings. Most of the slings I tried were useless as I couldn't get them on and off easily by myself, and Patrick would end up becoming distressed. But the one shoulder type without buckles that I'm showing in these pictures was a lifesaver. It literally became like my second arms. So there's no buckles in these slings. They're just literally something you would put over your head like a handbag. And you can see they suit for different kind of weights of the baby. Another very important support for me in the early days was another mom with one arm. After the birth of Patrick, I got in touch with the National Rehabilitation Hospital, where I get my prosthetic arms, asking could they give me any advice on accessible equipment for parents with disabilities. They sent me out some information, but more importantly, they told me that there was another mother with one arm who was willing to give her number out to other one-armed mothers. I called this woman, and we must have spent nearly an hour and a half on the phone with her telling me about equipment that worked for her. She also came over to my house to show me some things. It was such an important connection. And now, since then, 5 of us mothers with one arms have found each other, and we have a WhatsApp group to give each other advice and support. So this is my journey so far. Deciding to become a solo mom is the best decision I have ever made. The early days were challenging. I wish that there had been more visible examples of parents with disabilities so that I could have seen other people doing this journey and felt more confident sooner that I could do it too. Sarah, you were one of my inspirations, by the way. I wish that there had been more visible examples of, I wish that there was more knowledge amongst maternity health staff around how to support people with impairments with newborn care and breastfeeding. While the staff in the maternity hospital were lovely and kind, they didn't really know how to adapt strategies for me. And I wish that disability care providers, such as the National Rehabilitation Hospital, would stock a variety of baby equipment for people with impairments so that we could try it out and see what might work for our impairment type. They also need to let us know that they provide any supports for parents. I found that so much baby equipment relies on you to have 2 hands, and I wasted a lot of money on products that were useless for me. In spite of these challenges, my son, Patrick, is the greatest joy of my life. He has literally just turned 3 and he is awesome. He is smart and strong and funny and fearless and full of energy. He gives the best hugs and cuddles, and he is so loving. He keeps me so he keeps me so busy, and I wouldn't change that for the world. So I wish that all people with impairments who really want a child get the supports they need to go on this life-changing journey too. Thank you for listening to me.
Gotcha. Thank you for the experience. I know from for people with no consent and normally very private. So thank you for sharing it because it will help the people make me feel less alone in their own journey. So yes, and this speaker is Theresia. Theresia is from the Bochum Center for Disability Studies, and she's going to give international fund to Eilionóir English. So thank you, Theresia.
Thank you so much for that work. Thank you so much for inviting me to this important conference. I am so moved by the research findings I read in preparation of this conference. As an activist of the German disability rights movement, as well as the international human rights movement, and as a 61-year-old woman who has been 6 times pregnant in her life, with the outcome of 2 children, I had 1 abortion and 3 miscarriages. I could say that all what I read is a reflection of what I experienced, and I'm pretty sure that most women, disabled women, or non-disabled women in this room even, would agree that this is a very common experience, and it is high time that this project has been carried out. But I'm not here to talk about my personal experiences. I'm here to give a 10-minute statement on the question whether the findings of this project are typical of Ireland or common internationally. From my experience as a former member of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities of the United Nations. And I also will try to answer the questions: how do the project findings relate to the human rights of disabled people in the Convention of the CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, as well as the Women's Rights Convention, which is the abbreviation is CEDAW. So are the findings unique to Ireland? No, they are not. I think Ireland's long-time abortion ban has overshadowed many of these findings and the specific sexist, ableist oppression against disabled women. But overall, it can be said that the CRPD committee had heard from many countries about the same problems, and like Malari from the Asian Disability Forum has already told us, this is a very common experience around the world. Participants in the hearings of the CRPD committee have reported about human rights violations, such as unwanted pregnancies, termination of wanted pregnancies, eugenic stereotypes, such as women with disabilities will give birth to disabled children and they are incapable of motherhood, discrimination by not having access to the same quality of health services, or the threats of having the newborn taken away, threats of sterilization, and no respect for the choices disabled women make, and the threat of legally incapacitating them. So ableism and barriers are widespread, and the attitudes among many medical personnel are often based on ableism and sexism, even internalized sexism. And it leads often to the restrictions of liberty of disabled women who want to parent and get pregnant. 10 years ago, in April 2013, our committee, the CRPD committee, held a general discussion on women and girls with disabilities. It was the preparation of a general comment on disabled women. And we had 4 sessions and on this day of general discussion, and One session was on sexual and reproductive rights. And many women with disabilities who came to this day of general discussions reported about discrimination during pregnancies. For example, Human Rights Watch documented discriminatory practices among reproductive health care providers in northern Uganda. In one case, a nurse admonished a woman with a physical disability who was unable to climb onto a bed of examination, saying, "How did you get on the bed when you got pregnant?" Similarly, in research in Argentina in 2010, Human Rights Watch found that women and girls with disabilities were all but invisible in the reproductive health system. After the general discussion and many more debates within the CRPD committee, we adopted the general comment number 3 on women and girls with disabilities, interpreting Article 6 of the Convention, which speaks about multiple discrimination and the duty to empower disabled women to enjoy all human rights enshrined in the Convention. And in that general comment, it says, wrongful stereotyping relates to disability and gender and is a form of discrimination that has a particularly serious impact on the enjoyment of sexual and reproductive health and rights and the right to found a family. Harmful stereotypes of women with disabilities include the belief that they are asexual, incapable, irrational, lacking control, and or hypersexual. Like all women, women with disabilities have the right to choose the number and spacing of their children, as well as the right to have control over and decide freely and responsibly on matters related to their sexuality, including sexual and reproductive health, free of coercion, discrimination, and violence. Now, that general comment is supposed to be a guidance for not only state parties, but also other human rights organizations in order to implement the CRPD. And I have looked as a preparation for this conference at the WHO site and whether they have come out with some guidance on for pregnant disabled women. But I haven't found anything. And so I'm really surprised to see that 10 years after this general comment, this has not resulted in the WHO taking steps in that direction. I mean, they have issued some good paper on forced sterilization against disabled women, but not on the right to choose for children. Sexual and reproductive health and rights are human rights. They are not only an integral part of the right to health, but they are necessary for the enjoyment of many other human rights, including the rights to life, freedom from torture and ill treatment, freedom from discrimination, equal recognition before the law, privacy and respect for family, life, education, and work. Thus, there are many other CRPD and CEDAW rights which are infringed by sexist and ableist discrimination or violence against pregnant disabled women. Both committees have taken some action on the issue of reproductive and sexual health rights. And in 2018, as Agnieszka from Poland has already mentioned, the two committees managed to adopt a statement on the sexual and reproductive health rights of all women, including disabled women. And in that document, it says, the committees call upon states parties to take a human rights-based approach that safeguards the reproductive choice and autonomy of all women, including women with disabilities. More recently, the CEDAW has addressed the issue of obstetric violence, that is, violence during birth, as a specific form of discrimination against women. In the case SFM versus Spain, decided on 28 February 2020, the committee found a violation of CEDAW, the Convention on the Rights of Women, due to violence during childbirth. The case concerned a non-disabled Spanish woman who who had an unproblematic pregnancy but endured a complicated childbirth due to unnecessary medical examinations without her informed consent. She gave birth to a daughter who was immediately taken away from her due to an infection which was probably the result of excessive unnecessary vaginal examinations of the mother. In its decision, the CEDAW committee referred to a recent report of the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women on a human rights-based approach to mistreatment and violence against women in reproductive health services with a focus on childbirth and obstetric violence. The Special Rapporteur defines obstetric violence as the violence experienced by women during facility-based childbirth and affirms that, quote, this form of violence has been shown to be widespread and systematic in nature. Quote N. The Special Rapporteur explains that the root cause of obstetric violence include labor conditions, resource limitations, and power dynamics in the provider-patient relationship, which are compounded by gender stereotypes on the role of women. I think this case, even though it happened to a non-disabled woman, is what disabled women experience on a regular basis if they become pregnant. And I hope one day we have a case of a pregnant disabled woman who comes to the committees and files a complaint. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you to all today. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, over here.
Thank you very much for all speakers. My first question is to Ms. Lynn, the researchers, relating to what I have what I have received, all the documents. So this is like yes, it's a bit question relating to the terminology that your findings or the written all of the documents of your research relating to the terminology of disabled persons or disabled women or any else that you have. I mean, I read from the documents. So I don't know, because I'm not English speakers. I mean, I'm not quite expert on the English. So I would like to know that because the convention says or using the terminology of person with disabilities or women with disabilities. So so maybe you can explain relating to the selection of your terminology are still in the terminology of disabled women or disabled persons and others. That's my question. I'm sorry for that, but I would like to know about that. Second is I would like to ask to I missed the name. Theresia. I'm so sorry. I already 61, so sometimes I forget the names. Yeah, you are talking about the obstetrics. Sorry, no, the last obstetrics violations. Can you explain a little bit more relating to that, and then the specific case relating to this the violence on obstetrics for women with disabilities? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Theresia Lynch. I'm an assistant professor in Trinity College Dublin. I was very moved by all you had to say. It's incredibly interesting hearing about the various experiences mentioned today, and I'd like to congratulate you on the project. first lady who mentioned her own experience and what they've seen, you know, how the research aligned. I remember just in terms of the research, when we have the research, but we also have the lived experience, and you've asked us to talk about our own experiences and what we've been through. I felt that was very powerful to hear those stories. And Eilionóir Flynn, to direct a question there, I thought that was excellent, and it really made me think about what you said. In the Centre for Deaf Studies in Trinity College Dublin, we have a group there that advocates and communicates with the nurses and midwives department in Trinity College Dublin. And I feel that they maybe aren't aware of how to communicate with deaf people, because deaf people use ISL, Irish Sign Language, but traditionally that has been oppressed. We've had experiences of discrimination. English is their second language. So sometimes they don't know how to even book an interpreter, or they'll say, oh, look, could your mother interpret for you if you present, you know, in a medical setting? They'll ask if your mother or your daughter could interpret for you. In the nursing department, there is a new module that has been introduced to nurses and midwives, where they can learn about the deaf experience. And as you mentioned, you know, doctors and medical professionals, their attitudes could be a dreadful problem. And, you know, we have to think, how can we get it at the root of the problem? And that would be going into students, you know, maybe if they could choose a module, you know, maybe based on the report, or that could mention information that was in the report. So once they go into university and depart, we could introduce this into universities and into their departments, that would help people to understand better the oppression that women face and the various barriers that are in their way. So I feel that could be the best way forward, would to tackle the problem at a university level and introduce the report in that kind of way. I just wanted to mention that. And again, Trinity College has been hugely successful in what we've done. You know, it's one of our own modules, you know, about, I feel that that's very important, you know, where we can really go more in depth into the problem and learn more. So yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Grace. I'm staying in Galway. I'm from Malawi. I would like to appreciate more for the comment that my namesake Grace said. From her story, you can actually see that persons with disabilities explore life as they go, despite the advocacy that has been going on the ground. And you look at the experience, it's quite a recent experience, where I believe the policy on the ground on health and disability, it's in force. Human rights, it's in force. The people are trained and taught everything. But I happen to be a midwife, I happen to be a nurse, and I really feel for her. And when she was presenting, I'm like, okay, there are a lot of gaps that have been revealed from her case. One of which is the prenatal care, which has a big gap. She wasn't, as you can see, given special attention to the disability she had. And this is just in her case. How many people out there are going through the health system or different services, and they have challenges, and the people don't even know how to go about it because of lack of application of the elements of individualized support that each one of us needs. Because she lacked that, she was taken care as another patient, another pregnant woman, another mother, but she had her own case. And look, during her after delivery, she still had challenges right in the hospital. Nurses were there. Everyone was there. Support for breastfeeding, there was a big gap. So I really see that we have a lot to do from what she said on advocacy and going beyond what we have done on the ground. Because indeed, our societies, our offices, officers, they have a gap. There's a challenge to implement exactly what we mean by supporting persons with special needs, persons with disabilities, or any other challenge. And we still need to advocate and not stop making sure that it's into the systems of people, into their lives. They take it as something that when they look at a person who needs service, be it in any other government office, people should look beyond that this is just a woman, but also taking into consideration issues of special needs that the person would require. I want to salute you, Grace, for your presentation, and you are a courageous woman. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try and respond to questions from me as best I can. So to answer Molani's question about the language we use in the project, so we talked about it within the research team and with our participants in the oral histories and our stakeholder group. And identity first language, I mean, all language is valid, and whatever language the person uses to self-identify, it's not for me to decide how someone should identify, but we felt that most people were more comfortable with identity first language in Ireland, and we could say disabled people, and that would be a better reflection of how people express their identity and describe themselves. But we tend to use the term, sometimes we do use the term persons with disabilities, also reflecting the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It's just both terms are equally valid, but we took an approach that recognized the collective identity and strength of disabled people, and so that's why we say disabled people. So I hope that answers your question about terminology. And again, why we didn't, of course, we didn't restrict this project to women, because the disabled people as a people are, interested in all the different elements of reproductive justice that we describe. So we do say women sometimes when we mean women, but a lot of the time we weren't speaking specifically or only about the experiences of women. So that's why we did that. What else? Oh, so Theresia made a really important point about the education of the next generation of medical students, nurses, midwives. That's also come up, and not just in the, I suppose, health services, but also in social care and also in the legal system, which is important when we see the kinds of decisions judges are making about interventions during pregnancy as well. So that's something we really care about as a project, and we hope that the toolkits we've developed, and we hope you will give us your ideas, all of you here today, about where we should be promoting those. But we do also in the University of Galway here have links with colleagues in the other departments, like you described for Trinity as well, and Jenny might say more about that later, because she's actually is teaching the medical students this year as well. So there are lots of opportunities to introduce this information, and I think what we found in the project is there's a real openness. People do want to learn, mostly, or at least people who talk to us want to learn about what to do in a practical sense. Someone just appears before them and needs some support. They're afraid to know what to say or to say the wrong thing, but then they just don't address issues at all, and that's not helpful for people either. So we hope with things like the toolkits, which we should have shared with everyone who's here today, and there might be still some copies left outside, that's another way that we can help to get people to think differently about practical steps that will help respect the rights of disabled people. So Theresia, I think there was a question for you as well.
Yes, the question about obstetric violence, I don't even know if I pronounced the word right, but it is violence in birth and in birth giving, and it's not violence because birth giving hurts, which we all know, but the violence is perpetrated by people around the birth giving in a special facility, in a hospital or in a house where you give birth. And it's a new development within the human rights field. I mean, for a long time we have heard, oh, birth is the best thing which can happen to a woman. It's a wonderful experience, But in fact, many women, not only disabled women, but many women experience violence during birth giving by being discriminated, shouted at, unnecessarily examined, like this Spanish case. This woman had an uncomplicated pregnancy, but she was examined 9 times in her vagina without her consent, just because the doctors or the people involved thought this was Okay. And then they gave her some more treatment, which she didn't consent to. They didn't inform her about the side effects it could have on the child. And this happens on a regular basis. So I think it is an experience all women share. We need to change it. We need to name the human rights violation. But what I wanted to make as a point is that I think it's good that we finally discover this new, let's say, human right, or that we call it a human rights violation. But we need to look at disabled women and apply the same human rights standard to disabled women, and not give disabled women the feeling, yeah, you are the problem, it's not us. And that's why you experience human rights violations. It's just your problem.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for your questions and appreciate the and get to the end session of the conference, and now we're going to be talking about Sandy.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Louise, Milicevic, and I'm chair for this afternoon's session on parenting. I'm delighted to be here and be involved with the project. And it's interesting, when the project started in 2019, I was on maternity leave with my third child, and what was interesting and very timely was that I felt that in the intervening 11 years between my first child and my third child, nothing really had changed in terms of supports for parents with disabilities. So when I saw when I came across the project, I just thought it was timely that I get involved. So today I'm joined by Jenny Dagg, is Dagg. Apologies, and I have an actual pet peeve about mispronouncing the name, so I'm very sorry, Jenny. Jenny Dagg is a postdoctoral researcher on the Reproductive Justice Project, and she's going to present her findings on the topic of parenting.
Thanks, Louise. So yeah, I'm going to talk for as long as I can until I'm told not to stop about the experiences of disabled parents in Ireland. So disabled parents are an invisible cohort of parents in Ireland. So when it comes to the intersection of disability and parenting, the majority of focus is on parenting disabled children. Similarly, when we explore the regulatory context, it's prevalent that the focus of our laws and policies are on a narrow conception of the best interests of the child, meaning that the rights of disabled parents are often of secondary consideration. In Ireland, we can see an increasing policy focus on parenting support, which has gathered a range of stakeholders and created engagement to look at ways of expanding parenting as a set of skills that can be learned. Our first overarching national policy framework on children and young people, the Better Outcomes, Brighter Futures, provided improved support for parents to enable them to feel confident, informed, and able in their parenting role. However, there is little reference to parents with disabilities in the framework. At the end of last year, DISCA published a new parenting support strategy where for the first time we see the visibility of parents with disabilities recognised along other forms of family types. We see them acknowledge the need for accessible information across the range of support available for parents, for practitioners to provide more information when working with families on the range of supports available, and on how and when to access them. We see an effort to provide a range of locally based universal and specialist supports for parents and family members, which reflect diverse family forms and identified needs, and to respond to structural inequalities that can impact families. While the goals of this new strategy incorporate many of the criticisms that we've identified within this project in relation to disabled parents in its previous strategy, we know that in reality the transformation at the level of practice to achieve these goals remains ongoing. Within law, we can see the emergence of the notion that the best interests of the child are generally best served by being supported within the family of origin. This is often undermined for disabled parents when the supports they need to parent effectively are not available, and when the existence of a disability or a perceived disability is used as a justification for state intervention in family life. Jurisprudence from international bodies, ECHR and Irish courts demonstrate that discrimination based on disability against parents in childcare proceedings occurs frequently. While there is recognition that disability cannot be the sole basis for interference within a family by external factors, the failure to provide reasonable accommodation and appropriate supports often results in the interference. So, for instance, we can see through the Childcare Law Reporting Project and the Voluntary Care in Ireland project that disabled parents are disproportionately represented in formal and informal childcare proceedings. Care orders requiring children to be separated from their parents can operate through voluntary care agreements, which do not require legal process or a formal involuntary basis sanctioned by a judge. The voluntary care project carried out in UCC highlighted the prevalence of parents with disabilities, particularly those with mental health challenges or a cognitive impairment, and the lack of independent legal advice before signing, unlike parents in childcare court proceedings that require legal representation. Additionally, they highlight how disabled parents may feel under duress by social workers to consent to a voluntary care agreement, or TUSLA may have to make an application to court instead. The sad reality of such voluntary agreements that are not subject to consistent review is that as time passes, less opportunities present for either parent or child to express their views on decisions affecting them, all the while remaining separated from one another. Our analysis indicates a number of factors that enabled disabled parents mitigate the systemic and structural barriers they encountered as they became parents. These include, of course, having a supportive family network, peer support they could turn towards, the ability to self-advocate, and encountering supportive key workers at pivotal times in their parenting. Crucial among these is the ability to self-advocate. Parents who are adept at articulating their needs, knowing the boundaries of assistance, of reasonable accommodation, and persistent in their requests for support were effective in mitigating potentially ableist and unsupportive scenarios. Sorry, yeah, I'm very fast because I'm like, so much. Okay. Often among participants, this ability to foresee and overcome challenges was articulated as a strength inherent from having an impairment, particularly a physical or mobility impairment, over the course of their lives and consistently having to perform to be recognised in various spheres of life. This can mean that those with invisible disabilities or acquired disability often experience greater challenges in identifying suitable resources, articulating their needs, and having those needs supported. Successful supportive outcomes hinge upon one's social capital, socioeconomic position, and ability to communicate boundaries of support. Some common barriers across impairment exist, for instance, inaccessibility of information and equipment we've all heard in the panels today, so inaccessible or accessible baby changing facilities and play spaces. The invisibility of disabled parents within mainstream pregnancy and parenting literature means that the resources to support disabled parents are often ad hoc, piecemeal, and unsustainable beyond the short term. Parents articulate a lack of representation within mainstream information on pregnancy and parenting, rendering them invisible among their parenting peers, and of a lack of disability-specific support, such as formal peer support that would enable them to improve their parenting skills and learn techniques from peers with similar impairments. Such techniques they mention include being able to ask how to change a child's nappy once the child becomes mobile when you may have a physical impairment, providing sign language interpreters for deaf parents, or recognizing alternative styles of connecting with the child beyond the normative frame of standard parent-child connection. For instance, there is no place for questioning a potential male foster parent with limited mobility about how they intend to play soccer with the child. Notwithstanding the gender stereotype and assumption of able-bodiedness, it also prohibits dialogue about the multitude of ways in which, as humans, we can connect with one another to form attachments. Almost all participants who were parents described experienced prejudicial attitudes or ableism from professionals. This was experienced on a sliding scale, with parents with physical disabilities and deaf parents describing excess scrutiny and unequal expectations of their parenting, to those with intellectual and psychosocial disabilities experiencing a removal of children from their care shortly after birth, with no disability-specific support was provided during pregnancy nor in place for when the child was born. For all disabled parents, questioning and scrutiny began during pregnancy with fear-inducing questions for first-time parents such as, "But how will you manage?" While this question may be defended as a poor turn of phrase, it is the practice and meaning of such a phrase that makes it problematic, including the way in which it travels through the tiers of institutional care. So the repetition of this question at every encounter and the onus on the individual to source suitable resources, making it a requirement that risk factors are mitigated against in advance by the disabled parent and to gather satisfactory solutions to addressing perceived risks. For disabled parents, this labour of access, of the individual being the solution to a socially generated problem, perpetuates the invisibility of the potential of their form of life. The escalation of such practices often gave way to new parents having to demonstrate changing and dressing their child in front of several health professionals in the hospital before being allowed to take their child home, being told in the hospital after birth that you could be a danger to your child, to experiencing daily visits over a 6-month period by the public health nurse as a condition of being allowed to continue to care for their child within their own home. In this last case, it's hard to fathom how exhausting for a new parent it must have been to face such visits on a daily basis for 6 months, knowing you had to perform to a high expectation of parenting or risk intervention. The intrusive scrutiny of higher expectations stemming from questions of managing that disabled parents experience and the effect that it has, particularly on new parents, is long-lasting and stark. As mentioned above, parents with intellectual or psychosocial disabilities are disproportionately represented in childcare cases. Often within these cases, evidence of parental capacity, based upon a parental capacity assessment, forms part of the evidence and justification for the separation of the child from the parent. From our interviews with key informants and discussion during our discussion topic for us, we heard how parental capacity assessments are used to confirm a lack of parental skills. They're ad hoc and arbitrary in nature, designed with able-bodied parents in mind, and the assessment often taking place in unnatural and inaccessible parenting environments. They are primarily requested and organised by TUSA to corroborate their concerns once a child has been removed from their care. They can also take place within residential parenting units, which are recommended to provide wraparound services for a parent and child to enhance parental skills for ability. For practitioners within a supportive role, residential parenting units are considered beneficial in providing parents with wraparound services and supports they may require for a short period of time, as well as ensuring continuity of care once the parent progresses out of the unit. However, there are flaws to this approach as research and evidence has shown why institutional environment fails to provide the compassion required to nurture parenting skills and parenting connection. For instance, the evidence from the Mother and Baby Homes report indicates the hardship and adverse environment that parents endured. However, it remains acceptable for parents with disabilities, particularly cognitive disabilities, to be placed in such settings alongside other high-risk categories, primarily those with experience of substance abuse. Interventions, including institutionalised residential care, were often experienced as coercive rather than supportive. For instance, one of our participants, Roisin, who has an intellectual disability, felt threatened by the idea of placement in a residential unit far away from her supportive family network. This threat occurred at 4 months pregnant, prior to any other form of support offered to enable Roisin to care for her unborn child, or her child once born. Additionally, barriers are evident for disabled parents who are engaged in the child protection system and require legal representation. Accessibility in terms of the communication of substance and procedure was highlighted as inadequate for both legal professionals and disabled parents. Legal professionals spoke of the difficulties of maintaining the accuracy of legal arguments when making them accessible. We stress the importance and role of an advocate or non-legal advocate to support this process, as a legal professional may not be undertaking such work on a daily basis. Also, acknowledgement of the length of time that may be required to successfully communicate with clients. I have lots more to say, but my bell has gone, so I will turn to the findings, but I can make this available. So to sum up, the key findings that we suggest are to make fully accessible and appropriate the parenting evaluations that take place, and to ensure that they're disability specific. To have information available on adaptive parenting strategies, including adaptive equipment, how you could adapt your home environment, accessible information, support and resources for those seeking and receiving support, particularly for those for first-time parents. Having disability awareness training for all practitioners, and creating formal peer support networks and placing these on a statutory footing in family resource centres or such like, or through the PPFS network. We also would welcome the inclusive universal parenting programmes, and that these be trauma-informed and non-invasive and disability inclusive. And lastly, I just want to say a huge thank you to all the people who participated in the oral histories in the project. It was a pleasure to hear and work with your stories. Thanks.
Thanks, Jenny. That was very, very powerful. It's very interesting learnings there. Next, I want to introduce Michelle McLaughlin, who is a deaf mum, and she will share her experience of the foster care process and the challenges that she met.
Great. So I hope the microphone can pick up my heart racing. Anyway, so thank you very much for inviting me here today. I am nervous. So I was born in London. My mother decided to move to Ireland and place me up for adoption in Cork. I wasn't adopted. So I was moved to a children's home, and that was when I was 6 months old. I grew up. I didn't have a language. You know, things were happening around me, but I wasn't acquiring a language. And that was up to 3 years of age. Up to that point, they hadn't realized I was deaf. They just might have noticed there's something not quite right, or is she a bit slow? They had all these questions, what's going on? And finally, they realized that I was deaf. So they didn't know when I was a baby, they didn't realize. So the children, there was loads of children in the children's homes with one nun to kind of look over us. And that was why I think it was very hard to catch what had been going on with me, because there were so many children in the environment. The nun's name was Sister Monica. She was an amazing nun. I know here in Ireland, we have a very negative view of nuns, and as soon as we hear that, we just straight to the negative, but she was incredible. She was my first mother. Really, she had this just natural instinct, and that's the relationship that we had. So when I was 3 years old, there was also a younger girl volunteering at the time, and she'd come in to help out with the children. You know, she was she wasn't a nun, but she was sort of you know, we had our house mother, which was a nun, and then we had this person helping us out. So this younger girl, I would follow her around all the time. I just wanted to be with her. I loved her. And, you know, she, you know, I was still in nappies at the time, and I didn't, you know, they didn't kind of toilet train me or anything. They couldn't communicate with me in order to do that. So I'd follow this lady around all the time, and I just loved her. And she went home to her mother, and she said, look, there's this beautiful girl in the home. She can't talk. She's so cute. Please, can I bring her home for the weekend? And her mother was thinking, I mean, I have 6 kids already. No. You know, Anne-Marie was the girl's name, was Anne-Marie. And she said, oh, come on, please. It's only a weekend. Come on, you'll love her. You'd love this girl. So, yeah, I arrived at her house. And the mother had said, you know, go on, okay, finally acquiesced. So I went to live with them. Now, the school was in Dublin, but the children's home was in Tipperary, okay? The family name was Quinn. So I had moved around to these 3 places. Now, sometimes there was another family that I would go with for a weekend, and then sometimes I'd be, you know, stay with another family. So I kind of moved around this way. And it meant that in terms of language acquisition, I mean, I had still very limited communication. I could see people pointing. I could see, you know, they were trying to communicate, and it was quite emotional. I was thinking, you know, where, you know, why am I here? Why am I being moved around? Why am I here this day? Like, why? I was in a children's home the other day. Nobody told me what was going on or informed me as to why I was going anywhere for a weekend. There was no communication with me whatsoever. There was no explanation. All I knew was I was being bounced around from place to place, and I kept thinking in my head, why? It was very traumatic as a young child. At that time, I remember it very well. I don't know what age I was at the time, but I do have this memory. And, you know, a nun had said, "Oh, you're going to the Quinn family." And I got really excited. I knew, you know, Quinn, I know who they are. I knew that word that I could lip read, Quinn. So like, brilliant. Yes, excellent. Got so excited. All pumped up to go. So the Quinn family, you know, brought me and I held their hand and I said, "Bye." And the nun was crying, "Oh, I love you. I love you. You know, you're finished here." And I thought, hang on, she's saying, what is she talking about? Am I moving? Am I going back? Am I never coming back? I just started crying, you know, and I didn't really know. I just, you know, I'd visited these people for a few weekends, but now I was going to stay with them. But that day that she said, "Oh, look, I love you very much, and you're going to go away, and I'm going to be crying." And I thought, oh, I'm never going to go back to this home. And that's why language and communication, like it was missing at the time. But anyway, I had still, you know, gone back and forth, and I learned language by myself without any support, without any communication support to tell me, you know, to explain language to me. I was learning the hard way by myself. You know, no child should have to do that to acquire a language. So up to 18 years old, I was in institutional services. I went to St. Mary's School for the Deaf. That was still an institutional service. I was there as a boarder in the boarding school. And there was, I went through a lot of the institutionalized services. You know, when I was with the Quinns, I had more of a feeling of family, but I got married. Now, unfortunately, my other half, Eugene, he's a lovely man. But we were married for 21 years, and we have 5 beautiful children from age 16 up to 25. So after my second birth, we thought, well, should we foster? We started a conversation, said, yeah, why not? I think we should do that. So we applied, and a woman came to our house. We had the discussion, and I then realized I was pregnant with my 3rd child. And then I had a 4th child, and then I had a 5th child. And, you know, I was thinking, this plan just got put on hold. You know, I had to focus on the children. They were very small at the time. So it was 3 years then ago, I was working in the boarding school. I mean, I was a boarder myself. I went back to the boarding school to work as a social care worker. So yeah, that's where I spent my time. So I found out about a girl who was looking for a foster home. And I thought, oh, that could be me. That could be me. So I went home to my husband, to Eugene, and without even thinking about it, he said, yeah, that's straight away. We knew, you know, because I'd grown up. I had those feelings. I knew what it was like. And I want to give back to somebody else. You know, I want to look after them the way I should be looked after as I was growing up. Now, of course, it's a different situation. And I mean, especially with communication and access, you know, we had a different situation. But the love is there. So this young girl is deaf, and she was looking for a foster home who used ISL, Irish Sign Language. So there was a lot of work to do in terms of linking in with the social workers. There was questions, there was assessments, a lot of paperwork, stacks of paperwork, in fact. But finally, we were approved. And after 12 months, we were absolutely delighted. We got our answer. Now, what I had envisioned, maybe, was the child would be like me and would have gone, you know, grown up like me. So I didn't want her to go through what I did. I didn't want this child in the system and stuck with communication barriers. I didn't want her to have what I had. So I didn't want history to repeat itself. So she had been placed in various foster homes, and none of them, with no interpreter was provided. Again, they didn't tell her where she was going. She had just moved around and gave a thumbs up. And yeah, off you go. You're going to this new place. Well done, thumbs up. And that was it. And she was thinking, well, what's going on? What's happening? It's very traumatic for a child to go through that. And I look back to my own childhood and I remember those parallels. I'm trying to think of guardian. So we have, sorry, a system in place now where the child has a voice. Sorry, I'm trying to think of the correct pronunciation. Guard electrum. Guard. Thanks very much. So we realized that this child, after the 5th placement that she was in, they realized that she needed an interpreter. So we wanted a family who had ISL. And again, this was all about access. So an interpreter was brought in. And the interpreter was great, but they weren't matching the child's level of language. You know, an interpreter, they hadn't worked with children. So it was completely different to the work that they normally carry out with adults in their everyday. And this was like a one-to-one kind of situation with a young person. So we brought in a deaf interpreter. And they were able to better match the child's language and had that communication. They knew the emotions were there. They'd know that the trauma they'd been through. Sorry, I know this is a long story. Will I finish? Have I got time up? So my story is all about access. You know, this child was included in our family and we were signing together, and straight away she could understand what was going on. I saw she was able to express her emotions. She was able to get involved in the conversation. And it's not when we say just about accessibility with ISL, it's the social worker had realized and accepted the need to book an interpreter. The child needed to be able to express what they wanted and to express their opinion and how they were feeling. I never had that. This child will have that opportunity. And it's crucial. And the social worker, the system has improved, but there is a need, for example, if you're placing a child in a foster home, the home needs training. If it is a deaf child, they need to learn sign language in the home. They need to have some kind of training, for whatever they want to discuss. And they need to be prepared for the child that's going to come to stay with them. They need to be able to learn sign beforehand, so that the child will feel comfortable. Now that needs to be in place before they arrive. I think I'm finished. I can see you looking at me now, keeping an eye on time.
Thanks, Michelle. That was a wonderful presentation. Our next speaker is Florencia Herrera Osterheld. Florencia is a sociologist and associate professor in School of Sociology at Diego Morales at the University of Chile in Chile. And she is going to speak about her research project around reproductive processes and parental experiences of people with disabilities in Chile.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. And it's been really, really amazing being here and hearing all of you. I'm from Chile, that's very, very far away from home. and I'm not speaking my own language, so please be patient and please let me know if you are not understanding me. It's really, well, it's not surprising, but it's really amazing that I've been conducting a similar research in Chile, a qualitative research with mothers and fathers with disability and with persons with disability about reproductive topics. And it's really amazing the similarities. You know, you can cross the oceans and be in a different continent and have this same experiences again and again. So, well, it's also it's difficult to bring like something new at this point of the day. I know you are all very tired. So, I was first of all, I was thinking about the importance of attitudes and ableism and how prevalent is in all different aspects in reproductive processes or pathways. I think it's especially pervasive in reproduction because of the way we as a society, or as different societies, you know, different countries, perceive disability as a really wrong or dangerous thing, no? That it shouldn't be, it should be eliminated or something. So as we are like all incomplete persons. Well, I said it before, I have a visual disability, you could say. When I was first, I know you're not here to hear my experience, but I will tell you anyway. When I was first diagnosed, this really, really kind and nice doctor hold my hand, told me you're going to go blind, and afterwards told me I shouldn't have children. You know, it was all in one package. Was a lot to, this was a lot of years ago, was a lot to understand and absorb at that moment. But it was put in that way to me together. You're disabled? So, he didn't say disabled. Huh? Closer? Sorry. I'll try to go slower. Well, I was saying this really nice doctor who diagnosed me told me at the same time that I was going to be blind. I'm not totally blind yet. This was 18 years ago. And he also told me I shouldn't have children because I had a genetic disease, so my children could go blind as me. You know, it was really difficult for me to understand, and it took me around 10 years to realize that he was saying your children could be like you, and realized I think I'm a very good person. I lead a very happy life. So what's the problem? You know, well, I have 2 daughters now, so I'm not very obedient. So I've been conducting with my team in Chile a lot of qualitative interviews. You know, we are always told that qualitative research is very contextual and context specific. So it's really amazing to see in different contexts we have the same realities, especially in health contexts. And I'm talking about doctors, nurses, health institutions, midwives. We have a lot of terrifying stories in Chile. I know it's not a competition, which of us has the most terrible story. And I was also thinking about in our interviews, I'm sorry to tell that social workers are never like spoken about in a positive way. You know, it's always about the danger to meet the social worker. So there's this mixed or this kind of recipe with these ingredients of over surveillance. That's 5 minutes, yeah. And this your suspect for having disability, and the lack of support. So if the lesson, if you're a mother with disability, you should not it's like awaken the beast, like to awake the state. If you alert the state, okay, I'm having difficulties, for example, to change the diapers of my baby, it's dangerous. Your baby could be taken away. So I want to bring one topic. I think it is important, and just to try to bring something to the conversation, how gender expectations make very different to be a mother with a disability or a father with a disability, or a woman or a man with a disability. When you think about reproduction, it's a very obvious statement, but in our research, we have discovered that mothers, we tend to be super moms. About, it's kind of what Grace was telling us before about reaching this. I was Grace in the other panel about how she could manage, but it's like a very solitary endeavor with really high expectations. I'm thinking about my interviewees in Chile, because you can't, awaken this beast of surveillance. You can't be seen as a bad mother, but to be seen as a bad mother is like the expectancies are really, really high, are much more higher than to a non-disabled woman or a non-disabled mother. I think it's really unfair. And I think we, women with disability, we are entitled to be not bad, but mediocre. I don't know how to say the word in English. Yeah, mediocre mothers, without having the fear that our children are being taken away for us. So these are super moms. In our interviews, mothers don't speak about their difficulties and in raising their child. It's like we've interviewed blind mothers, deaf mothers, and they don't talk about the difficulties in everyday situations. It's, I don't know, for me, for example, when my girls were little, it was very hard, or I had to take them to the park. I'd take them anyway, but I had a lot of strategies because I was very afraid they will, I don't know, be taken away from me or run off or something. Usually in the interviews, women don't talk about that, but fathers, they do, because they don't have this kind of really high expectations. It's different. The fears of fathers are different from the fears from mothers. Mothers fear they are going to see us bad mothers and not capable. Fathers fear that won't be able to provide for the families. So gender expectations are really, really important. And I think it's relevant to think about men, disabled men, situations and experiences in reproduction. I don't know. For example, in one interview, I had a blind father that told me he wasn't allowed in the birth of his son because the doctors thought he was going to be like an annoyance, that he's going to be like, what are we going to do with you? So another topic, I think, and super dads then, sorry, just to finish the idea, super moms are like this, I don't have any problem, I can do everything by my own, no? Super dads are the men that they do run away, they are like there, they're like just existing. So in our interviews, it was kind of funny because it was like men were like, I don't know, this is going to sound really awful. They're like double disabled, they have this impairment, I don't know, whatever, this guy that was blind, and they were men. So in the in reproduction, to be men, it's like kind of a fun impairment, it seems. They are regarded as incapable also. And that was difficult for them. So I think that's an important thing to have in mind. My time is over. But I think the other ones, want a little bit further, so you won't take this microphone from me. The other thing, just to point out, is we are conducting research now, right now with children with disabled mothers or fathers, and it's really, really interesting. And we are just beginning, but it's lovely to hear these boys and girls talking about the mothers and the father with so much pride, so much pride. They're like, and they are like educators, you know, in their own schools and with their old friends. There was a girl whose mother was visually impaired, and she said, obviously in my classroom, everyone knows what ableism means, you know? It's a difficult word. In Spanish, it's even, it's not at all common. Usually people doesn't know what it means. And just to finish, thinking about, there was one line that in the report that was about providing a base level of access that I think it's really, really important, because as we learned from your story, in disability, discrimination is by omission. You know, it's if you don't do anything, you're discriminating and you're excluding. So it's very important to be like actively thinking about access in all different ways. And it's very important not to think that disability it's the same as dependency, and that dependency it's a bad thing. So I think that the main topic, no, I'm extending, I'm trying to finish. There is not a contradiction to care and to be cared for. We are all in these caring relationships that are reciprocal. I don't know if that is a word in English. And I think it's very important to think of disability in a positive way, like to think then what are we bringing to society, not what problems can arise about I don't know, because you have to make this special adjustment or everything, but how diversity really enriches society. And I think that's again a great example you gave about like multi-generational families and disability. So how well, I think the whole idea is like we should, and this is a quote, obviously, like equip the world. And we need, for example, deaf social workers, disabled doctors, nurses, midwife, along with training, you know, along with specific training. I think we need like scholarships, or I don't know, force disabled people to get into medical school. Like my daughter now has an autistic psychiatry, and it's great. It's been like the best thing ever. So I'm gonna finish there. Sorry.
Thank you very much for a marvelous presentation. And I'm just reflecting here and thinking there's so much material we could actually didn't have a 2-day conference. So I want to open up the floor now to any questions I have for our panelists.
Hi, my name is Pamela Rochford. I'm a senior advocate with the National Advocacy Service for people with disabilities in the West. I just blown away, and it's so good to be here and so good to have this toolkit. And actually just wanted to touch off what you said there. We even struggle to have working class social workers in Ireland. Maybe Galway can make that happen. We definitely need to equip the world. But just on, my question is for Jenny, just in relation to the recommendation around parental capacity assessments or evaluations into the future. Something struck with me from Freya's opening piece around the right to PA supports. And I suppose in our work, we'd work a lot with parents going through the system with intellectual disabilities, psychosocial disabilities. And like, I suppose there's a number of issues around parental capacity assessments, the lack of regulation of the professionals doing them, the lack of quality standards, the lack of consistency. I know you touched off a lot of that, but I suppose it's around, did that come up, like if you have an assessment but the right isn't there then to have what's recommended, you know, provided to you. And I suppose the theme what's come up in every different session from, you know, fertility, pregnancy, parenting is coercion. And I suppose, you know, from our perspective, and I think probably everybody here, resources and rights are probably the weapon to fight coercion. So I suppose it's kind of more, my question is, is there an exploration around that? It's great to hear there's research being done on adult children or children of parents who have disabilities. And I suppose they can maybe feed into what would have helped them or what supports would have helped them. And I suppose just that theme of kind of how do you change that culture of coercion, because we do have good policy. That's another theme that seems to have come up a lot, is around, we actually really have good policy out there in relation to people with disabilities. So it's just how do we change the kind of the barriers, the cultural barriers that are there, even if we had everything else in place. Thank you.
So my name is Elaine Graham. I'm from the Irish Deaf Society. I also represent the National Deaf Women of Ireland, and I'm just blown away by Michelle's presentation. Of course, everybody this morning was excellent, and I really enjoyed watching all your stories and think about how I really resonate with you, Michelle, though, and your experience about growing up and that isolation you experienced. And I just have an idea, you know, about how different families operate in terms of the planning for foster children and everything, and the system that you went through. Did you have a chance to adopt, say, a non-disabled child, or do you think the view was more deaf parents? Would there be more chance for them to adopt a deaf child? Did you have, you know, a choice, or was there limited choice? Do you wonder, you know, I know you already have 5 children and they're not disabled, but in terms of, are you qualified to look after a non-disabled child? I just want to pose a question to you. Was there yeah, can I respond now? Sorry, Michelle, can I respond now to that question? Yeah, so to respond to Elaine, thank you for bringing that question up. I fostered a deaf child, yes, for the 3 years. Then she went into a different residential care. But the social worker who contacted me said, "Were you ready for fostering again?" And I said, "Yes," but I never questioned, you know, is it for a deaf or disabled child? It was just, are you willing to foster any child? Or age, or, you know, if they're hearing or not. So there was no query in my mind, you know, from my previous work, I know I would be able to look after, you know, any deaf child, or a hearing child, or a disabled child, or it didn't matter to me. But you're right in terms of the question. But the answer is no, I was willing to foster any child.
Just in relation, Jenny, what you mentioned about, you know, the information that's been out there about parenting disabled children, but not disabled persons parenting children. It's interesting that like within the past year, there was the Supporting Parents National Model of Parenting Support Services produced by the government. But if you look at the front cover, and you can see they tried very hard to be inclusive, but you've got an adult pushing a young child in a wheelchair. Where's the disabled parent with the child? So, you know, the information needs to translate into the imagery as well, because sometimes it's the imagery, especially on the front cover, that lets you know whether or not this is for you or not, if it's going to include you or not. So I just think that's really important. That's not just about words, it's about pictures as well.
So we're going bring this afternoon's session to a close. Thank you very much to all the panelists.
Are you closing, or will I respond to the question on capacity, or I might do that just to answer the question from the floor, and then I do realise we are seriously running over time. So you're absolutely right to address your question first, that the visibility is not just about the words, but also visibly being seen for your representation to be seen within the literature, and that's absolutely something that came through, that the internalized ableism occurs for parents because of a lack of representation within literature that's supposed to include them, for sure. There's a lot to say about parental capacity assessments. Whether they're fit for purpose is a large question, and what they're actually being used for. Whether they're, when we speak to the key informants, they use them to identify a lack of skills and to help identify where skills require support. That's their justification for maintaining them. But unfortunately, in practice, we see them instead being used as evidence within the court for identifying a lack of skills and a justification for the separation of children. So there is a complete disconnect between the creation and the use of these on one side, and the justification for the separation of children. So they're objective, they're tick the box exercise. They take place within scenarios, the assessments take place within scenarios that are not conducive to normal parent-child connections. There's lots of ways in which they're felt as coercive, experienced as coercive by those who undergo them. They don't feel they represent their capacity. And then we do see that even if supports are identified as being required for the parent to expand their skills, they're not provided. So when they're used as evidence in court, the support that's identified that the person needs has not taken place. And that's something for the judicial process to take into consideration. And it has been commented on as well by legal professionals within our key informants, that there is this kind of either or scenario. Either they have the capacity, or the child is their separation takes place, instead of a both and, instead of both, parent and child require support and that should take place. And the disconnect between there is quite fraught. Yeah. Hope that answers your question.
So that brings this afternoon's session to parenting to a close. Thank you very much to all the panelists.